There is a quiet truth no one warned you about. The children who were ignored did not grow weaker. They grew sharper. While the world assumed neglect would leave them broken, something else was happening underneath the silence. Something the world wasn't paying attention to. Something that would later become impossible to ignore. You were told that being unseen damages a child. And in many ways, it does. But what no one explains is what happens to a mind that learns, far too early, that no one is coming. That mind doesn't shut down. It sharpens. It begins to study the world the way a soldier studies a battlefield. Not because it wants to, because it has to. You weren't loud about your pain. You weren't dramatic. You weren't the child who cried for attention. You were the one who watched. The one who noticed which adult was about to lose their temper before they even spoke. The one who felt the tension in the room shift before anyone said a word. The one who learned to read silence the way other children learned to read books. While other kids asked for love, you studied faces to understand if love was even possible that day. While other kids spoke their feelings, you swallowed yours and waited for the storm to pass. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you had already learned that words rarely changed anything. And here is the part no one tells you. That child wasn't broken. That child was being trained. Trained in a language most adults will never learn. Trained to see what others miss. Trained to feel what others ignore. Trained to understand human behavior at a depth that books cannot teach. So before we go any further, ask yourself something honestly. What if everything you thought was your weakness was never weakness at all? What if the silence, the sensitivity, the watching, the feeling too much, the noticing too much, what if all of it was something else entirely? What if it was your training? And what if that training is about to become the most powerful thing about you? There was a kind of silence in your childhood that didn't sound like silence. It sounded like forks against plates, like television in the background, like adults talking over each other about everything except the things that actually mattered. You sat at dinner tables where no one ever asked how you felt. Not really. Not in a way that expected a real answer. And slowly, without realizing it, you stopped expecting one too. You learned to swallow emotions before they had names. You felt something rise inside you, something heavy, something confusing, and before you could even understand what it was, you pushed it back down. Because you had already noticed what happened to feelings in your house. They were inconvenient. They were dramatic. They were too much. So you became less. You shrank yourself into something smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. And the strange thing is, you got good at it. But while you were shrinking on the outside, something on the inside was expanding. You started noticing things no one taught you to notice. The way your mother's voice tightened a half second before she got angry. The way your father went quiet in a way that meant something was wrong, even when he insisted nothing was. The way the air in a room could change without a single word being spoken. You became fluent in a language no one knew you were learning. The language of what people don't say. And yet, while you were decoding the entire emotional world around you, the people in that world looked at you and called you too sensitive, too quiet, too emotional, too much. They didn't see that you were carrying their unspoken pain in your small body. They didn't see that you were absorbing the tension they refused to name. They didn't see that the child in front of them was doing the emotional labor of an entire household, alone, in silence, without ever being asked. You became a translator of pain that wasn't yours. You learned to soothe adults who never learned to soothe you. You learned to predict their moods, manage their reactions, soften their anger, lift their sadness. You became the emotional caretaker of people who were supposed to be caring for you. And no one ever said thank you. No one even noticed. There were nights you cried into your pillow not because something specific had happened, but because everything had happened, all at once, all day, every day, and there was no one to put it down with. You felt everything, and you felt it alone. That is a kind of loneliness most people never understand. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who cannot see you. And here is what you need to hear. You were not too sensitive. You were perceptive in a world that refused to be perceived. You were not too emotional. You were emotionally awake in a house full of people who had been asleep for years. You were not the problem. You were the only one in the room paying attention. But that level of attention came with a cost. Because what begins as awareness in a child slowly becomes something else in an adult. It becomes a pattern you have probably been living inside your entire life without ever realizing it was there. Most people believe their sensitivity is just personality. They believe they were simply born this way. born to feel deeply, born to care too much, born to give until there is nothing left. But sensitivity, the kind that ignored children develop, is not personality. It is architecture. It is something the nervous system built brick by brick, in silence, while no one was watching. When a child grows up without emotional safety, their brain does something extraordinary. It refuses to stay vulnerable. It begins to scan, constantly, quietly, relentlessly. Every face becomes data. Every tone becomes a warning. Every shift in the room becomes a signal to be decoded before it becomes a danger. The child does not choose this. The nervous system chooses it for them, because survival demanded it. And that scanning never stops. It follows you into adulthood. It walks into every room with you. It sits next to you at every dinner table. It listens to every voice on every phone call. It reads every text twice, 3 times, looking for the thing that isn't being said. You think you are just observant. You think you are just intuitive. But what you are actually doing is something far older than intuition. You are still protecting the child who learned that no one was coming. This is why the same situations keep finding you. The friend who only calls when they need something. The partner who feels familiar in a way you cannot quite explain. The workplace where you somehow become everyone's emotional dumping ground. You are not unlucky. You are not cursed. You are recognizing emotional frequencies your nervous system was trained to recognize. You are walking toward what feels familiar, even when familiar is exhausting. And here is the quiet truth almost no one will tell you. Your sensitivity was never the problem. Your gift was never the problem. The problem was that you turned a survival tool into an identity. You took something your nervous system built to keep you safe, and you wore it like a definition of who you are. You said, "This is just me. This is how I love. This is how I care. This is how I exist." But what if it isn't? What if everything you have been calling your nature is actually your training? What if beneath the sensitivity, beneath the overgiving, beneath the constant emotional labor, there is something else waiting? Something quieter, something stronger, something the world has not yet seen, because you have not yet seen it in yourself. Because once you understand the pattern loses its power over you. And that is where everything begins to change. There comes a moment in every ignored empath's life that they will never fully be able to describe to anyone else. It does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in the quietest possible way. A phone that doesn't ring. A message that doesn't come. A person you trusted choosing someone else. A long drive home in silence. A moment alone in a room where, for the first time in years, you stop performing, stop explaining, stop trying. And something inside you cracks open. It is not a breakdown. It only looks like one from the outside. From the inside, it feels like something far more dangerous. It feels like the truth. You sit there, and the silence around you stops feeling empty. It starts feeling honest. And in that honesty, every story you have been telling yourself about your life begins to fall apart. The story that you were just unlucky in love. The story that you simply attracted the wrong people. The story that you were too sensitive, too soft, too much, too emotional. All of it, falling away, piece by piece, until what is left is something you have spent your entire life avoiding. Yourself. And in that moment, a question rises up inside you that changes everything. What if I was never broken? What if I was simply never seen? What if everything I have been calling my flaw was actually my perception? What if the pain I have been carrying was never proof that something was wrong with me, but proof that something was deeply right with me, in a world that didn't know what to do with it? This is the turning point. Not because the pain disappears. The pain does not disappear. The pain transforms. It stops being a wound and starts becoming a window. You begin to see your entire life through it. The childhood that taught you to read silence. The friendships that drained you. The relationships that confused you. The years you spent apologizing for the depth of your own feelings. All of it suddenly makes sense, and that sense brings a strange, uncomfortable peace. You realize you were never the problem in the rooms you walked through. You were the only one paying attention in them. You realize the people who called you too sensitive were often the people who could not handle being perceived. You realize the relationships that exhausted you were not random. They were a mirror, showing you exactly where you still believed you had to earn love. And something extraordinary happens in this moment. You stop blaming yourself for being deep. You stop apologizing for being aware. You stop trying to convince people who never wanted to understand you that you were worth understanding. The energy you used to spend explaining yourself starts coming back to you. And for the first time in your life, you do not know what to do with it. Because you have never had it before. This is the moment awareness replaces ache. Not because the ache was wrong. The ache was the messenger. The ache was the part of you that refused to lie anymore. The ache was the truth you had been swallowing since childhood, finally rising to the surface, finally demanding to be heard, finally being heard by the only person who was ever supposed to hear it. You. And once you hear yourself, something shifts permanently. You cannot go back. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unfeel what you have finally allowed yourself to feel. The version of you that survived through silence, through overgiving, through endless emotional labor, that version of you has done its job. It kept you alive, but it cannot take you any further. Because what comes next is not survival. What comes next is something far more rare. It is rebuilding. The rebuilding does not look the way you expected it to look. There are no dramatic announcements, no long speeches, no grand transformations the world can applaud. The rebuilding of an ignored empath happens in silence, in the smallest moments, in the spaces no one else gets to see. It happens the first time you read a message that would have shaken you for days, and you simply close your phone and breathe. It happens the first time someone tries to pull you back into a familiar pattern, and you feel the pull, you feel it clearly, and you do not move. Boundaries begin to appear where apologies used to live. You stop saying sorry for needing rest. You stop saying sorry for not being available at every hour. You stop saying sorry for feeling things that other people are uncomfortable witnessing. The word no, which used to feel like a crime in your mouth, slowly starts to feel like a return to yourself. And the people who only knew the version of you that always said yes begin to grow quiet. Some of them disappear. You let them. Silence replaces the urge to over-explain. You used to defend yourself in long paragraphs, in careful sentences, in conversations that drained you for days afterward. Now, you watch yourself begin to say less. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understand that not every accusation deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every person needs to be convinced of who you are. You stop performing your truth for people who were never going to believe it anyway. Self-respect becomes louder than the need to be liked. This is the shift that changes the architecture of your entire life. The old you is anxious, reactive, always available, always reachable, always afraid that being unavailable would mean being abandoned. The emerging you is something different. Calmer, slower, more selective. You stop chasing closeness from people who are never close. You stop performing intimacy with people who only know how to take it. You begin to move through the world with a quiet kind of authority that comes from finally choosing yourself, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is lonely, even when it costs you people who were never really yours to begin with. You used to be emotionally available to everyone. Now, your presence becomes something earned, not given freely to anyone who asks, but offered carefully to those who can actually hold it. You used to overgive because you believed your worth depended on what you could provide. Now, you understand that worth is not something you produce. It is something you are. And that single shift rearranges everything. This is not personality change. This is identity shift. At a level so deep, even you cannot fully describe it. The world has not changed. The people in it have not changed. You have changed. And from this point forward, nothing will ever feel the same again. Most people will live their entire lives without ever developing what you are about to develop. They will move through the world half awake, reading only what is said out loud, believing only what is shown to them on the surface. They will trust the wrong people because they cannot see beneath performance. They will miss every warning sign their instincts try to give them because their instincts were never trained the way yours were. What looks like ordinary sensitivity in you is, in truth, something far more rare. It is a form of intelligence the world has not yet learned to name. The first ability that begins to surface in you is something close to surgical discernment. You can sit across from a person and feel the gap between who they say they are and who they actually are. You can hear the words they choose, and you can hear the words they avoid. You can sense the small inconsistencies that most people would let slide. The smile that arrives a half-second too late. The compliment that carries something underneath it. The kindness that feels rehearsed instead of real. You do not have to think about it. You simply know. And the more you stop dismissing this knowing, the sharper it becomes. This is not paranoia. Paranoia is fear without information. What you have is information without noise. You spent your entire childhood studying human behavior at a depth most adults never reach, and now, that study has matured into something almost surgical. You can read intentions before they become actions. You can feel manipulation before it becomes obvious. You can recognize the people who collect others for their own benefit, often before they have spoken more than a few sentences. The world calls this intuition. But intuition is just the word people use for intelligence they cannot explain. The second ability that emerges in you is the ability to read intentions before words are spoken. While others wait for proof, you sense the direction of a person before they have moved. You feel the energy behind a request before the request is made. You notice the moment a conversation shifts from genuine to strategic. You can tell when someone is performing affection to extract something from you. And you can tell when someone is genuinely present with you, not because of what they say, but because of what they do not need to say. This ability alone will save you from years of the kind of mistakes most people only recognize in hindsight. The third ability is something almost no one expects: emotional regulation under pressure. The ignored child who once felt every emotion at full volume, who once drowned in the moods of everyone around them, slowly becomes someone who can sit inside intensity without losing themselves in it. You begin to notice that other people panic in moments where you stay still. Other people react in moments where you observe. Other people get pulled into chaos in moments where you simply watch the chaos and refuse to enter it. This is not coldness. This is mastery. The same nervous system that once absorbed everything has now learned to filter, to choose, to remain. And then comes the rarest ability of all: the strength of strategic silence. Most people speak to fill discomfort. Most people explain to feel safe. Most people defend themselves against every accusation, every misunderstanding, every misreading of who they are. You begin to do something very different. You begin to let silence speak for you. You stop arguing with people who are not actually listening. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what they want to believe. You stop entering battles that were designed to drain you, not to resolve anything. And in that silence, something powerful happens. People begin to feel the weight of you, even when you say nothing at all. This combination of abilities makes you something the world is rarely prepared for. You become almost impossible to manipulate. The tactics that work on most people, the guilt, the flattery, the urgency, the carefully placed words designed to pull a reaction out of you, they begin to lose their grip. You see them coming. You feel them before they land. And when you do not react the way you used to react, the people who relied on your old patterns become disoriented. Some of them get angry. Some of them retreat. Some of them try harder. None of them succeed. You also become quietly magnetic, not in the loud way the world celebrates, but in a way that is far harder to describe and far harder to forget. People sense depth in you, even when they cannot name it. They sense that you are not performing. They sense that you are not chasing. They sense that there is something settled inside you that they have been searching for in themselves. And whether they admit it or not, that kind of presence is rare enough to feel almost unsettling to them. You walk into rooms differently now. You no longer enter looking for approval. You no longer enter scanning for acceptance. You enter as someone who has finally stopped performing, and that alone changes the temperature of every room you walk into. People do not always know why they listen when you speak. They only know that they do. This is the truth no one tells the sensitive child. Your sensitivity was never fragility. It was advanced intelligence wearing the disguise of softness. And now that you understand what it actually is, the world will never feel the same again. There is a version of you that no longer exists, and most people in your life have not yet realized it. They are still speaking to a person who is no longer there. They are still pulling the strings that no longer move you. They are still using the words that once made you flinch, the silences that once made you panic, the strategies that once made you bend yourself into whatever shape they needed. And one by one, they are discovering that none of it works anymore. You no longer chase closure from people who were never capable of giving it. You used to wait for the apology that would never come. You used to replay conversations in your head, trying to understand why someone hurt you, hoping that understanding would somehow undo the hurt. You used to believe that if you could just explain yourself clearly enough, the right person would finally see you. You no longer believe this. Not because you have grown cold, but because you have grown clear. Some people will never understand you, and you have stopped requiring their understanding to feel whole. You have become observant instead of absorbent. There is a difference, and it changes everything. The old you walked into a room and took on whatever was in it, the tension, the sadness, the unspoken anger, the moods of strangers. You carried it home. You carried it into your sleep. You carried it for days. The new you walks into the same rooms and notices the same things, but you no longer take them inside you. You see them, you understand them, and you let them stay where they belong. You still feel deeply. That has not changed. What has changed is who you bleed for. You no longer bleed for people who have never bled for you. You no longer pour yourself into containers that were never built to hold you. You no longer mistake someone's need for you with someone's love for you. You have learned, finally, that being needed is not the same as being valued. And you have stopped settling for the imitation of love that the wrong people offered you for years. There is a quiet authority in you now that was not there before. It does not announce itself. It does not demand to be seen. It simply exists, woven through every choice you make. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You react less, but your presence creates more impact. You explain less, but the people who were meant to understand you, somehow, always do. The performances are over. The proving is over. The endless emotional labor of trying to be palatable to people who were never going to digest you correctly, that is over too. And here is the philosophical truth at the center of all of this. The children who were ignored grew up to see what others could not see. That vision was not given to you. It was earned in silence, in confusion, in years of feeling everything alone. And now, that vision has become your quiet authority over your own life. You see manipulation before it lands. You see intention before it is spoken. You see yourself before others have a chance to define you. And in a world that runs on illusion, the person who can see clearly is the person who can never again be controlled. You were never meant to remain the child who was overlooked. You were meant to become this. The one who finally sees, the one who finally chooses, the one who finally walks through the world on their own terms. So before this ends, sit with something for a moment. The silence of your childhood was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of your depth. Everything that hurt you was quietly preparing you for a level of awareness most people will never reach. Every moment you felt unseen was sharpening a vision that the world will eventually have to reckon with. You were not falling behind in those years. You were being formed. Ask yourself honestly, which of these abilities has already begun awakening in you? The discernment that sees through performance. The silence that no longer needs to defend itself. The clarity that no longer chases closure. The presence that no longer bends. Whichever one is rising in you, share it in the comments. Someone reading those words will recognize themselves in yours, and that recognition is its own kind of healing. If something in this spoke to a part of you that the world has rarely spoken to, consider subscribing. Not for content, for company, for the kind of truths most people are too afraid to say out loud, told here, slowly, honestly, for the ones who have always felt them. And remember this, long after the video ends. The child no one listened to became the adult everyone underestimates. Until it is too late.